My name's Joan, I'm your games mistress, and here's a little bit about re-rolling dice. The moment you invite dice into your game, you are surrendering at least a portion of that experience to chaos, randomness, the unknown, the unknowable, the uncontrollable. Dice in games have a long and sordid history. A lot of people have had a problem with dice, and not just because they lost a game of Risk. Dice have long been associated with dangerous people, soldiers, mercenaries, sailors, gamblers, but it's not just a thing about association. There are some religious beliefs that hold that chance belongs to the devil, meaning that human free will is part of God's plan, but as soon as you leave something up to chance, that's an opportunity for the devil to sneak in and do his work in this world. And if you're one of those people who feels like they always lose games because of bad dice rolls, you can probably be forgiven for coming away thinking that dice are pretty much Satan's own little six-sided helpers. I mean, it's that one big moment in the game. All you have to do is not roll a 1, so you take the die and you throw it out into the unknown, and it spins and it tumbles and everybody holds their breath as they wait for it to settle, and it's a 1.
No! No!
It's not a good feeling, but if your game involves dice, it's bound to happen sooner or later. Yes, even if you expect it to happen. Yes, even if you preemptively say, oh, it's going to happen. Yes, if one of the other players jinxes it by saying it's going to happen or saying it's not going to happen. By the way, that's not actually a thing. You cannot jinx a roll of the dice by saying that they're going to come up a certain way or that they're not going to come up a certain way. Don't be superstitious.
This is a house of lies.
Safi. So how can we mitigate this? How can we make games where there is luck, there is randomness, but it doesn't feel quite so crushingly awful when the dice don't roll your way? Well, that's what this video is all about. You see, in this modern golden age of tabletop game design, we don't necessarily have to create games that use the same kinds of rules that older games like Snakes and Ladders did. Back in the 1950s, a little game called Yahtzee came out. And Yahtzee asked a question. What if I told you you could re-roll your dice if you didn't like the results?
Whoa!
We're going to come back to Yahtzee again a little bit later, but for now, just take a moment and think about this. Your big moment comes. Disaster strikes. The worst happens. But instead of screaming and cursing fate, you pick that die right back up and you roll it again. Not because you're some kind of filthy cheater, but because that's what the rules of the game say you're allowed to do. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that disaster won't strike again a second time, but if it does, it serves as kind of a reminder to everybody there, including you, of something that you might have forgotten. And that is that the person rolling the dice doesn't control the result. Unless there's some kind of filthy cheater, in which case you should throw them out of your home and tell them never to darken your gaming table again. There's something I've noticed sometimes about people playing games who are unsure of their skill or unsure of whether or not this is something that they would feel welcome doing, whether they feel comfortable doing. And that is that they seem to feel a lot of the time that the results of their dice rolls are a reflection on them as people. Like, if they get unlucky dice results, that must be because they weren't trying, or because they deserve to lose. This is kind of a weird application of what's called the just world fallacy, which may very well be the most dangerous, destructive, and hateful logical fallacy that a human mind can commit. The just world fallacy is the mistake of thinking that the universe is innately just the way it is. The reason why this is dangerous is because it leads us to assume that if somebody is in a good position, they must deserve it. And if somebody's in a bad place, they must deserve that too. We look at rich people, powerful people, and we just assume, because the world must be innately just, that they deserved it somehow. They worked hard, they were virtuous, whatever. And similarly, when we see people in terrible situations, really, really unfortunate situations, even things that are obviously beyond their control, we have a tendency to view them as deserving of their fates. We apply this to ourselves sometimes too when bad things happen to us, figuring that this wouldn't happen to us unless we were bad people. Why do people assume this? It's hard to say for sure, but I think the main reason is because it's really scary to believe that the universe is capricious and uncaring. And it's so much more comforting to think that justice is something that just happens on its own. It's not something we have to work towards. It's not something that we have to create. Because that sounds like a lot of hard work. And what if we get it wrong? So the just world fallacy creates all of these terrible problems in the real world, but it can also destroy our ability to enjoy play at the tabletop, which ideally should be a place that's safe from all that sort of judgmental nastiness. And it would be, too, in a just world. So you rolled the die, and it came out bad. And maybe that feels bad, and it feels like it was your fault somehow. But if you take that same die and throw it again, and you get the same result again, well, it starts to feel more like it's just plain bad luck, doesn't it? You didn't control the roll of that die. You're no cheater. Kind of makes it feel like it just wasn't meant to be. It's not your fault. By redoubling the effect of random chance on the outcome, it lowers the emotional stakes of the game. It makes it easier for us to detach ourselves from the result, to feel like the dice were just against us. We lost, but it's okay. It's not our fault. So you see, this fear that so many people have around playing games, this fear that makes playing games feel so intimidating and scary and not fun for so many people, we can mitigate that through game design. And I think rerolls are one of the simplest and best ways to do that. Okay, let's go back to Yahtzee. Yahtzee took a page from 5-Card Draw Poker, a game where you get a hand of 5 cards, and you can discard some of them and draw new ones to replace them. In Yahtzee, instead, you roll 5 dice. You decide which ones you want to keep, and you re-roll the others. And then, you do it again. And it's only after 3 rolls that you're stuck with what you've got. When you take a look at one of those scoring sheets that you use to play a game of Yahtzee, that's a lot of columns and rows, and it really doesn't look like it could possibly be all that much fun to play this thing. And the people who published Yahtzee to begin with had a really hard time marketing this thing. They realized in the end that the only way they could get people to understand how much fun this game could be was to make them actually play it. So they set up these events called Yahtzee parties, kind of like Tupperware parties. Think of this, picture this in your mind. 1950s, this is Mad Men era, okay? So smoke-filled party rooms filled with attractive people, with beautiful 50s fashions and martinis and cigars, playing Yahtzee. Sexy Yahtzee parties. But I think a big part of the reason why Yahtzee got so popular back then was because of those rerolls. I mean, think about it. It's the 1950s, Monopoly's been out for 20 years. People are really used to playing Monopoly. You roll the dice, the result comes up, you're stuck with it, that's how it goes. Now you need to roll a lot of special combinations to fill in all of those spaces on those Yahtzee score sheets. But when you've got rerolls every turn, suddenly your chances don't seem so bad anymore, do they? That same mechanism, with taking a bunch of dice, rolling them, re-rolling what you don't want, and then doing it again, is just so compelling. A lot of other games have sort of taken that idea and run with it in all kinds of different directions. You can use it to build little houses out of straw, wood, and brick in the 3 Little Pigs. Or you can use it to build an entire Bronze Age civilization and roll through the ages. Maybe you'd rather destroy stuff instead of build it? You can be a giant monster in King of Tokyo. Or maybe you don't go in for all this narrative stuff and you'd rather just have a modern, streamlined version of Yahtzee with dots and numbers instead of characters and stories. You can play that with Yam Slam. Seriously, it's a better Yahtzee. But that's not the end of it. You can get a lot trickier if you want. Here's some deeper magic with rerolls. If you get to reroll the dice every single time, you can start to get used to it. And if that happens, rolling 3 or 4 times can start to feel the same as rolling once, because it's that last roll that counts. So, an advanced trick that you can do in game design is not to let people re-roll every time, just some of the time, just when they really, really need to. Here's one example of that I really like. In Cthulhu, Death May Die, each player takes on the role of a monster-hunting hero facing down horrifying creatures from beyond space and time. You fight them by, what else, rolling dice. When they fight you, you roll dice for them to see how it turns out. When they hit you, your health goes down. If your health drops to 0, you're dead. But in addition to your character's health, you've also got stress. Whenever you get a dice roll that you don't like the result of, you can spend stress to pick up one of those dice and roll it again. If it's still bad, you can spend another stress to do it again, and you can keep right on doing it until you get the result you wanted, or until you can't take any more stress. Now this is genius because it means you get to decide whether something matters enough to be worth re-rolling. Do you want to use them all up early in the game so that you can get the jump on the bad guys? That can totally work. Do you want to save them up for those moments when you really think you most need them? That can work too. You have to remember though, a reroll is no guarantee of success. In fact, your odds of getting a success on the second roll are exactly the same as they were the first time. Is it worth it to take the chance? That's up to you. Play it safe, take a risk. Either could be a good move, and you get to make that choice. And the very fact that it's up to you can actually wind up being a bit of a problem. You see, when you give players this much control over what's going on, you can bring back the specter of the just world fallacy, as players who are relatively unsure of themselves can wind up thinking, I'm so bad at this game, terrible, so dumb. This absolutely is the kind of thing that can come into someone's mind, especially if they're new to playing games and unsure of whether or not it's okay to mess up in front of their friends. Spoiler, it's totally okay to mess up in front of your friends. That's part of what play means, and that's a huge part of why play is important. So here's something else that you can do to lower the emotional stakes. And it's something that's particularly useful in this specific game, and that is silly subject matter. Let's not forget, this is a game where you're playing a monster hunter battling impossible beasties that don't make any sense. This is incredibly silly, and that's awesome. I mean, it doesn't mean you're not going to try your best. There are still innocent people who are going to have their souls devoured by impossible eldritch evil if you fail, but it is still a game, and games are best approached with a spirit of playfulness, which to me means sincerely trying to do well, while at the same time knowing that it's okay if you fail. Besides, if you run out of rerolls, you can still try to do things. It's just that whatever your roll, you're stuck with what you get on the first try, which kind of puts you at the mercy of that same unfathomable cosmos we were talking about before, which is kind of appropriate considering that the creatures that you're fighting in this game are sort of literary representations of that very cosmos. Now, of course, not every game needs to have low emotional stakes. Some games are all about the high-stakes moments, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. For some games, and especially some players, the whole fun of it is that moment, that intense moment, where everything that you've built up to, all your hopes, all your efforts, all the energy that you've invested in this game for minutes, hours, however long it's been, all of it comes down to the roll of one capricious little piece of plastic. Everything in that little miniature world that you've created together with your friends comes down to something that is completely beyond anyone's control. The power of chance arises differently in almost every game you can name, so with a bit of searching, almost anybody can find a game that does it in a way that's fun for them. But maybe the most important thing of all to remember is that no matter how many rerolls you get, no matter how lucky you think you are, everyone's luck eventually runs out. And that's okay. Thank you so much for watching. This channel is supported by Patreon, and you can hire me to help you make the most of your game nights at joanthegamesmistress.com. If you can't afford any of that, that's perfectly fine. You can still help me out with a like, sub, ding, and that doesn't cost anything. Also, if you've got a favorite game that you think could be made better with rerolls, let me know about it in the comments. Remember though, mean comments get deleted, and mean people get banned, so play nice. Your turn.